All right, let's dive in. Today, we're heading back in time to 19th century India. We're going to meet some incredible thinkers and reformers who looked at their own society. I mean, its deepest traditions, its core beliefs, and they had the courage to ask a really tough question. Can we do better? And wow, their answers would end up reshaping an entire nation.
But let me start by asking you something. How do you challenge the rules you've grown up with? The ones everybody just accepts? It's a hard question, right? Well, for a whole generation of Indian leaders, that wasn't just a hypothetical question. It was the central challenge of their lives. So let's take a look at the world they were trying to change.
So just picture it. We're in the 19th century. India is a society caught between two massive, powerful currents. It's a place just simmering with tension, and you can feel it in the air. Something big, something radical is about to happen.
And that brings us perfectly to our first section, India at a crossroads. What exactly were these forces that were pulling society in completely opposite directions?
And this right here was the core of the conflict. On one side, you had these ancient, deeply rooted traditions, the super rigid caste system, the practice of sati, complex idol worship, stuff that had been around forever. And then on the other side, the British arrive, and with them comes this tidal wave of new Western ideas, things like reason, liberty, equality. It was a true collision of worlds.
So, what lit the fuse? What really sparked the drive for reform? Well, it was like a perfect storm of three things. First, British rule and Western education created this brand new, educated Indian middle class that started seeing their own society through a totally different, more modern lens. Second, you had Christian missionaries who were openly criticizing local customs. Ironically, this pushed Indian intellectuals to re-examine and defend their own heritage. And finally, you had European scholars who were digging up India's amazing ancient past, its philosophy, its science, which gave Indians this renewed sense of confidence and pride.
And right out of this incredible mix of ideas steps our first great architect of change. A man so influential, he's often called the father of modern India, Raja Ram Mohan Roy.
Roy's entire argument was really built on one powerful idea: monotheism. He believed that the original Hindu scriptures all pointed to a single universal God. In his book, Gift to Monotheists, he basically called for a more rational faith, one that was stripped of all the complex rituals and polytheism that he believed were just later corruptions.
And you can literally trace his impact through these key moments. He started out small in 1815 with the Abmiya Sabha, which was basically a little debating club. But his ambitions grew. He helped start a college for modern education, then he established the hugely influential Brahmo Samaj, and finally, his relentless campaigning was a major factor in getting the Sati Abolition Act passed in 1829. You can see the progression, right? From a private debate to changing the laws of the entire nation.
But not everyone thought that blending in Western ideas was the answer. Our next key figure, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, took a completely different approach. He was a revivalist. He argued that India didn't need to look to the West for reform at all, but back to its own incredible ancient roots. His message was as powerful as it was simple. Go back to the Vedas. Now, the Vedas are the most ancient Hindu scriptures, and Dayanand believed they contained pure, universal truths. He argued that everything else, the rigid caste system, idol worship, the ban on widow remarriage, all of that stuff was just baggage that was added on later and needed to be tossed out. To spread this message, he founded the Arya Samaj in 1875. And this wasn't just a religious group, it was a movement for cultural and nationalist revival. It attacked the caste system, and it was one of the very first to really popularize the term Swaraj, or self-rule, with the powerful slogan, India for Indians. He also started the controversial Shuji movement to bring people who had converted back into Hinduism, and laid out all his ideas in his famous book, Satyarth Prakash.
Okay, so if Dayanand Saraswati wanted to revive India from within, our next reformer, Swami Vivekananda, was the one who took India's spiritual philosophy and broadcast it to the entire world. I want you to look at this year, just the number, 1893. What happened in 1893 that was so important?
This was the year that Swami Vivekananda, a young monk nobody had ever heard of, traveled to America for the first ever Parliament of World Religions. And when he spoke, he received a standing ovation that went on for minutes. His speech introduced the West to Hindu philosophy not as a bunch of superstitions, but as a profound universal faith. He became an international sensation, literally overnight.
Vivekananda's mission was totally inspired by his guru, Ramakrishna. He promoted what you could call a neo-Hinduism, a modern, rational take on the faith, and he put it into action by founding the Ramakrishna Mission in 1897. This wasn't just for prayer. It was a social service organization built on a beautiful core belief that the highest way to worship God was to serve the Daridra Narayan, to serve God in the poor.
So, after all these powerful movements and these amazing charismatic leaders, what was the actual result? What's the real legacy of this whole era? Well, it's a complicated triumph.
On the one hand, the achievements were absolutely monumental. Laws were passed against sati, women's education got a huge boost, and these movements gave Indians a deep sense of national pride. But, on the other hand, there were some serious limitations. For the most part, these ideas only really caught on with the educated urban folks. The vast majority of people in rural areas were largely untouched, and sometimes that focus on a specific religious past actually ended up creating friction between different communities.
But here's the single most important thing to take away from all this. Before a nation can fight for political freedom, it has to first believe in itself. These reform movements, by encouraging Indians to think critically about their world and by building a shared sense of pride and identity, laid the essential intellectual groundwork for the independence struggle that would come later.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Questions about tradition versus modernity, about caste, about the role of women in society, these were the debates these reformers started. How do you think those same debates, nearly 200 years later, are still playing out, not just in India, but all across the world today?